Welcome to Inquiry into Self, and I'd like to take this time to just explore what is the experience when we're actually noticing this one reality that we are, that everything is, rather than interpreting it. So there's this one unfolding, constantly unfolding. And before interpreting, there's this intimate experience with it. There's this realness with it because we haven't distracted ourselves with our interpretations. There's this palpable aliveness everywhere, a singleness everywhere. Now, to experience that, to notice that, to sort of marinate in that, we drop away the constant interpretation. We let it recede into the background. The interpretation is like this layer of labels that creates this sense that we know what's going on, but it's not that intimate knowing, it's an analytical abstraction. So when we're not doing that, so let's look first at exactly what does that mean to not be doing that? Well, it means that we drop all the adjectives. We don't see things as clean and dirty, hard and soft, good and bad. They're simply what they are. They're the essence of what they are. There isn't rose because every single flower is its own unique essence. So we can't categorize things. That's starting to distract ourselves into the analytical mind. So we can't really even name things. You could say door, table, or shoe, but that's really just putting them into a category of all doors, all tables, all shoes. We're not categorizing at all. So we're relaxing out of the naming, out of the categorizing. There isn't this kind and evil. There isn't this right and wrong. There isn't this old and young. There isn't sky and earth. Yeah, there's this thing, that we experience that's open and this thing that we experience that's hard. But there's no categorizer to really push them apart into their different categories. There's a perceiving that they feel openness or hardness, but before it even differentiates them, it's just this constant perceiving, this constant noticing. So there's not any water, wet and dry. They're not even colors, really. All of the colors, yeah, we can perceive them, but we don't start labeling. So there's this softness as all those boundaries just aren't being made. You maybe just see this open perceiving of lots of perception, but the perception is not divided without any categories. There's no divisions. There's this open perceiving and perceiving coming in. And right there, that's the last duality, where there's the perceiving and the perceived. The perceiving and all the perceived is merging into this constant it undulates, right? Because there's something dynamic, but it doesn't have all the parts, at least not as named parts, just as this continual what is perceived, what is perceived, what is perceived, and there isn't the judgments about it. So the last duality is there's the perceiving, the observer, and the perceived. All this flowing, coming in. And then at some moment, you might even drop that final duality. You can't even fully distinguish what is perceiving, what is perceived. It's just a moment. And a moment unfolding, and a moment unfolding, and a moment unfolding. All the things that we call suffering depend on us having an aversion to something arising in the moment. Now, there can be an argument, right? Some people would say, well, when they send me their bad energy, they yell at me, they're angry at me, they push me, that's bad, right? Or that's suffering. They disapprove of me, they neglect me, they overlook me, whatever it is. But all of that is labeling a perception. So really it takes, to be able to really experience this, we drop away all those labels. Yeah, okay, somebody yells at us and their perceiving might include this movement. The perceiving might include a tightening. The perceiving might include pressure. The perceiving might include a whole lot of things that, aren't peaceful, but that's the label, right? Peaceful versus not peaceful. Loud, invasive, all that's just the labeling. It's just an arising of something may feel like an impact. Then that arising passes. Without the labeling, the passing actually happens much faster. Without the labeling, there's the impact and then the impact is over. So there's all of these things, all these experiences, and the labeling adds on right or wrong, less than or more than. The labeling causes the suffering. And there may be, it's not like this thing here has to be forced or controlled into some statue. That's controlling. That's a forcing. That's a imposing. No. This thing here might move back, might turn around, might walk away, might have sounds coming out of its mouth. Yeah, all of that is part of the what is perceived. This thing, it breathes, it digests, its eyes blink, it hears sounds, it may emit sounds, it feels an impact, it may turn, it may move in any sort of way. Without the labeling, that doesn't mean that this suddenly becomes static. This is this is all in the what is being perceived. And the ownership of it, that requires the labeling. that this thing here moving has to know what it's doing, has to know why it's doing it, has to come up with a goal that it's going for, reason or responding. All that is in the labeling. So without that, yeah, we may call it instinctual movement or whatever that is, but our conditioning, it does that. If you lie in bed in the morning and just wait, at some point this thing gets out of the bed. The brain is really good at predicting when that's going to happen and coming up with the reason why it's doing it, but this thing just gets out of bed. So there's a movement. You can have a glass of water in front of you, you're doing things, and then this thing is drinking from the water. It wasn't like, I'm going to drink water, or there could have been, but but before that there was a initiation of water, a thought of water, and then there was the I'm going to drink. There was some initiation that we can't put in our labeling as controlling. Our labeling can't control. So we're in this flow. There's all this perceiving, all that what is being perceived, and all that this thing does is what is being perceived. And we have the perceiving or the perceiver, and then at some point, even that is a label, the perceiving and what is perceived. And it's just simply erupting now, erupting now, erupting now. Now, when I say there's no suffering, that doesn't mean that this thing doesn't have what may feel like sadness. This thing may have a tightening, may have water coming out of its eyes. And there's nothing wrong with any of it, because there's no labeler to call it wrong. But what's interesting is it seems like those kinds of things that feel, that we would normally call sadness, just this thing, the body feeling tightness in the gut and pressure behind the eyes and tightness in the throat. That seems to happen more when there's all the meaning making happening. And the less and less of the meaning making, it just seems to happen that the stuff like sadness happens less and less. Or maybe for a while more and more, and then less and less. So it's not like there's this bliss state overtaking the system, trying to control and get to a bliss state. It's just another controlling, another goal, another evaluating, another agenda. But instead, there's, whatever this thing's doing that may or may not feel happy, the perceiving starts to feel so constant, so unstoppable, so timeless, that the safety is immense. And out of that safety comes kind of a curiosity into this upwelling. That may feel like a big leap, right? How do you get to safety? You aren't doing any judging, but so you're in this constant like now and now and now, but the now could have, these things don't feel safe. Well, they don't feel safe to everything that's named, right? Everything that's named can be destroyed, can pass away. So, of course, there's all the naming things don't feel safe. All the named things don't feel safe. But somehow, the more and more time bathing, or the more fully sunk into that, there's this knowing, that the knowing, the perceiving is actually, now you have to use naming, right? Blank. Feels sort of like dominant, forefronted, front staged, chief, in that it's like this force, this habit. The more, and sometimes it's just all of a sudden that happens, or it can be gradual over time that happens. But this beingness, this perceiving, it just becomes like, core. Really, really core. So that all the named things are just not quite as core. And when we know this, that we are unconditionally, regardless of circumstance, regardless of external circumstance, regardless of internal circumstance, truly, regardless of circumstance, when we're experiencing this infinite that we are, noticing it. It's what we are all the time, regardless of whether we're noticing it. So this is not a change in what we are. This is not arriving somewhere. This is not becoming something. It's just a shift in attention. And as this becomes dominant, this doesn't get hurt. So the suffering diminishes. And then there's this curiosity of, wow, this moment arises in this wholeness of everything. What is here? What is here before the naming? So that, and the curiosity might not come. It doesn't always come. At some point it seems to usually come, but maybe at first it's a stillness. Could be nothingness. A real just nothingness. This beingness could feel like rest, could feel hollow. But before, forcing it into naming and forcing it into evaluating, there's a simplicity. And just sinking into that simplicity. It's dynamic. Like, while it's so constant, there's a eruption out of it every moment, and there's a texture. May feel very vast, may feel very nothing, and effortless. And then there may suddenly be the curiosity. And then There may be simply a, a friendliness, a holding. And the conditioning can bring in confusion and fear and avoidance and, a bunch of interpretations about it. Those are just interpretations. And they're not quite as substantial as this real unfolding, and they're certainly not as substantial as this perceiving. Not in that it has substance, but in that it's not imagined. It's not made up. It's like the real of the real of the real. And as we feel that realness, which is, it's an attunement into the realness. As we do that, it just seems like there's a little more joy. There doesn't have to be. For no reason there can be grief. And yet somehow the grief usually can't go all the way down, is it? Or all the way out? Is like a space around it or a beingness underneath it? Who knows? But there's not a resistance. The grief doesn't mean anything. In fact, you can't even label it grief. It's sensations. They come and they pass. There's like an entering into the sensations of grief and then sensations of grief and sensations of grief. And then there's the beingness, the perceiving. And so this that we are, it's so timeless, so unstoppable. And there's no prescription particularly for getting there, and no description particularly of what it will unfold as we're noticing it. But there's less and less of the labeling and identifying and more of a moment by moment arising. And in that moment by moment arising, it may feel like willingness, or may feel like a yes, may feel like a relaxing, or feel like an openness. But none of those are its essence. They're just sort of pointers. So when we're in our suffering, there's a leaning into the labeling. And there can be a lot of movement that doesn't necessarily feel like peace, but without the labeling, it's just a fast flow. So you can't say it always feels like peace. You can't say it always feels joyful, or always, it's, and yet it does have this constancy. So this is just a way of letting the labeling relax. Why? Because something in us seems to really like this realness that's before the labeling. So letting the labeling relax, and the singleness of the perceiving, what is perceived, and then sort of marinating in it and discovering this this preciousness right now, this aliveness right now, this simpleness right now, this emptiness right now. It allows an access that it seems to go beyond our conditioning. Not that we're ever truly limited by our conditioning, because we're always all that is. But there's a noticing of no repeat, a permission of the new in each moment. And there's a spontaneity that can come out of that. So just play, feel what that feels like. Give yourself the gift of just doing what makes no sense. We're not finding sense. We're noticing what we are. And if you find this helpful or think someone else might, please push like and subscribe.